And for the benefit of the tape, as they say, it's great to be able to introduce Jenny Hughes and Dimitrios Roxanas from the University of Sheffield, who are going to talk to us about using Crowdmark for assessing handwritten student work. So Jenny, Dimitrios, over to you when you're ready.
Lovely, thank you. So I'm going to be doing most of the talking today, and Dimitrios is going to be monitoring the chat, answering some questions. We'll probably get through a little bit quicker than we said for the 20 minutes, so might get back on time. But basically what we're going to talk about today is this time last year, we'd got through all the initial chaos and we were looking for something a bit better for assessing handwritten work than what we'd kind of cobbled together just to get us through initially. And part of that was that we were looking for what options we had out there. There weren't very many, and we couldn't find examples of UK institutions that were using them. So today is a bit of a chance to be able to show people what we've been using this year, because we went with Crowdmark, which is a Canadian company. They mostly are known in Canada and the US, not so much outside of there. So what I wanted to be able to see was how would this work in the wild in a UK institution? And we couldn't really answer that. So I thought I'd talk about that today. And I'm a digital learning advisor, so I work mostly with Faculty of Science. That's because I used to be a maths teacher, so I tend to quite like all of the kind of sciencey STEM subjects. But Dimitrios will also talk about the perspective of actually using it to do marking on. So he'll be able to give you a little bit of the what it's actually like to do it for marking big numbers of assessments and kind of answer any questions about that. So the plan for today is what we're going to do, have a little bit of a look at how it works. So the setup and the marking features that we've got, and then the feedback from students and staff, because we did a pilot, we've got bits of information about how they got on with things. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my video now because I'm better at doing demos if I don't have to concentrate on trying not to pull a silly face. And I'm going to take you into this, which is an assignment I've set up for today. So in here, when you go in, you're taken straight into the grading panel because generally that's what you're going to be going in for. I'll just show you quickly what my questions that I set up looked like. So I've got a few options. I've got an assignment description, and some students really like to have the PDF that they can just download. Some of them even want to print it so that they've got all the questions in one place, work through them, upload them later. And I can do that by putting it in here. If you recognize this, this is done in Markdown. We can do Markdown and LaTeX in any of these questions. So my first question was an integral one, and I'm expecting an image response or PDF file. We ask our students to do it by using Microsoft Office Lens because we've found that that gives pretty good results where they scan things and you can see it as clearly as possible because they can do things like edit it to make sure that there's perspective correction in there, a little bit of making sure that the colours work well. So that tends to help make sure we get good things from the students. I'll show you a couple of examples using that in a minute when we start marking. My next question, I've got one where they're going to do a text response. And the last one, I've got multiple choice. So I've just done one of each question type. And if I go back here, I can go in, and this overview grid is showing me that question 3, the grading is complete. I didn't have to do anything there because it was multiple choice. That was all done for me. If there was a problem with it, I could go in and I can check them and I can look at what's been put and I can do things in there. But the main point of a multiple choice question like that is that we want it automatically marked and to not have to do any marking, which is ideal. And then I can see question 1, 60% graded, 2 left. I can click on this and it'll take me straight in to the next unmarked question. So it tries quite hard to be helpful to you. If anybody's ever marked for GCSE or A-level maths, quite similar to some of the systems that are used by the exam boards there. So here it's taken me straight to booklet 5 because that's the first unmarked one. And I've got tools down the left-hand side. So I can go in and I can look and go, yeah, something's gone wrong here. and I could circle it. If that blue isn't showing up particularly well, I might want to change it to a red, draw myself a question mark, or if I don't want to draw the question marks, because I do use question marks quite a lot often, I can go in and I've got some stamps that I could put on like this. We can also highlight with boxes, but the thing that's most useful here is that there's a comment bank. So I can go and I can type a comment in, but on the left-hand side here, I've got all of these comments. So every time I type a comment in, it stores it in the comment bank for me. So it's trying to make things as quick as possible so that instead of having to type out the same thing, you'll notice from this question, they've gone wrong with their negatives, which pretty much you can guarantee is going to happen quite often on a question like this. So I can set up some of these responses already. So I've got one here that says, careful with the negatives, integration method's correct, but you've gone wrong after substituting Z. Oh, but I've made a mistake. So if I've made a mistake, I can go in, sort my mistake out, click save, and what it will give me a chance to do is automatically update that for all of the other responses that have got that comment on. So if you were finding that students have made the same mistake again and again and again, and instead of just writing, you've made a mistake, you start to want to be able to say, you've made a mistake, please go back and watch this video and embed a link to the video, you can do that. So you can go back, you can edit any of your comments. And I've imported all of these. So these comments have all come from a previous version of this, so that if you're doing the same assessment with multiple classes, or if you're just doing ones that are very similar where you're going to be using the same sort of comments, you can import them in. If it's for just an assessed piece of work where feedback isn't as important, some of the people in the department have been using comments like 2/10. Because what that does is it automatically adds the marks on the right hand side over here. So I've got this automatically generated mark here where every time I drag a comment on, it will add those marks up on the right hand side. And if I go too far, if it goes over the amount of marks, it'll update that for me in amber to show that there's a bit of a problem. So I can go back in and I can overwrite it. Clear it and have 7 marks. So I've got quite a lot of features that I can use to be able to change things. If I want to set it up so that I've got it like this with the 1/10, 2/10, or if I want to set up a bit of a rubric, then I can go into the comment library and I can go in and I can edit them in here directly. So this one, 1/10, I didn't put a mark on that. So I can go in, change that, put myself a mark in. And again, that will update all of the other instances so that it'll go back, and if that's been used anywhere, it'll just add it onto the previous ones so that it's doing that thing where you're halfway through marking, you realise that you've been a bit mean or you've been a bit over generous, and you have to go back and try and find all the ones that had that mark on. With this, I can find them a little bit quicker because it'll automatically update like that. But I could also go up and filter evaluations and look for ones that have a score between, say, 0 and 5, where I might think that I hadn't been generous enough, or look at all of the ones that I gave 10 marks to check that I'm happy with them. I've also got a few other things I can filter on. So I'll just close for a second and show you where the tags are, because over here I can put a tag on something. And this was used quite a lot where, for example, there was a potential case of plagiarism. Somebody was a bit unsure because maybe the handwriting looked a bit odd or there was something a bit strange about it. You can put in a tag that says check. The students don't see those tags even when it's sent back to them, but you can filter for all the ones that say check. And you'll notice I've got this one here that says check, go through to the next unfiltered. Yeah, they look very similar. So I can go through and have a look at things and bring up just specific bits so I can find out a bit more about how the marking has gone with that. I'm going to go back to this question. And when I've finished marking a question, I can use shortcuts to get myself through to the next one. I can either do the next filtered, or there we go, clear filters, or next ungraded along the bottom. Or what tends to happen if you're doing this for quite a lot of things, then you get used to using the keyboard shortcuts, because there's quite a few useful ones in here that particularly helpful if you're just trying to get a mark on there without necessarily huge amounts of feedback. You can go through, type in your score, click enter, and it'll take you through to the next one. So if I click enter, it'll take me to my next unmarked one, where again I can drag and drop. And these comments, similar to when I was setting up the questions, they can have LaTeX in, they can have Markdown in, so I can pretty much include anything that I need in there with those comments. So if I put a link in, I can have a clickable link using Markdown that can take students out to a video to watch so that they can go over things again. So it's now saying last ungraded booklet, which is great. And hopefully what should be happening here is that I go to the overview grid and I can see how everybody's got on with each of these. Because I'm doing it by question, there can be multiple people marking at the same time. So whereas if you had paper, you've got to be either trying to split them up by page or being able to kind of mark your questions, pass them to the next person. I can be marking question 1, somebody else can be marking question 2 at the same time, and that doesn't cause any problems. We can also have multiple markers on the same question and then change who is the primary evaluator to say which is the one that we're going to keep the mark from, if that's something that's going to be useful. Okay, so if I've finished doing most of my marking, I can go back and I can have a look at the results. You get a chance to export this, takes it back into Blackboard for us. We can also download CSV files, and we get a few bits of stats with things like distribution of scores, so we can see how people have done. This one, clearly, it's because this was the multiple choice question that was self-marking, so they either got full marks or no marks. There wasn't really anything in between there. So we can go in and have a little bit of a look at how students have done overall. Okay, so I'll come back to any of this if there's anything people want to ask questions about. You're welcome to put them into the chat at any point. But really, the thing which is probably quite interesting to see is what did staff and students actually think of this. So when we did a pilot, this was before it was released fully for the January exams. In November, we did a pilot. 108 of those students gave us feedback about how they got on with it. And it was really reassuring feedback, because we were planning to use this for the January exams. So really wanted to know that it was going to be okay. 99% of them said it was easy to use. The one who said it wasn't, they put in the comments section that they were having problems trying to get the PDFs they'd made from their phone onto their computer. So we sent them a bit of information about that to try and help with that. And 90% said better than the previous alternative. So what we'd had previously was Blackboard assignments. And the reason they liked it better is they talked about being able to upload easier. So you could have a JPEG or you could have a PDF. You could have multiple files, or you could have one PDF and then split it up. It felt a little bit more natural to them to be able to see the individual questions and put things in the right places. They liked the fact that they could check what they'd submitted, and if they noticed that there was a problem with it, so for example they'd taken the picture badly, or they'd made a mistake in a question which they only saw when they uploaded it, they could go back in and resubmit all the way up to the deadline, which is something that the admin staff also really appreciated, because previously students would submit and then send an email saying, I've submitted entirely the wrong file, it's all awful, can you please fix this? And they'd have to go in and fix it for the students, whereas at least this way, students could fix that problem themselves. Where they said that they didn't really like it, we had the majority of them said that it was the same as the previous alternative. They didn't really see it was better or worse. The two that said that it was worse than the alternative, it was because they didn't like having another system, which is a very valid point. But in the end, having looked at all of the feedback, we decided that it was worth the extra system, given that the vast majority of students talked about some really good benefits for it. And I've put on here from the Physics Staff Student Committee. This was in a discussion about what should we keep next year. And unprompted, they said that Crowdmark was so much better for submitting their weekly homeworks because it meant they didn't have to run up the hill. If you've been to Sheffield, you'll know that everything is on a hill. Didn't have to run up the hill or up the stairs to get to hand it in. And they thought this was much better for accessibility reasons, so that students didn't have to come in on a day when they might not already be in, and it was easier for the disabled students. So that was quite a useful thing to be able to hear about, that they found that it worked much better for them than the paper hand in there. In terms of staff feedback, we sent out a survey to staff who used it for the January exams, and it tended to be that the course admin teams did the setup and then the academic staff did the marking. So we gave a chance to feedback on both of those sections. The staff who'd set it up talked about how much it had sped up the process, and they were really, really pleased with it. They found it so much easier and more intuitive to set up. They could go in and they could find out information about the students. So I said about how students could resubmit up to the deadline, but also from a staff side, you can go in and you can see what time they accessed it. You can see when they tried to upload. You can see if an upload failed. You can find out all of that information, which is really helpful when students email you in a panic. They could also submit on a student's behalf. So if a student had real problems for whatever reason, then they could just email the PDF and the member of staff could submit it on the student's behalf quite easily, which then just put it into the marking pool with everybody else and meant that it streamlined the process from there on. In terms of marking, this was first time anybody had been using it. There were, I think, a couple of people who'd been involved in it in other institutions previously, but for the majority of staff, first time using it with quite big cohorts for high stakes exams. So I would say the fact that we've got 53% who said that it sped things up is going very well. Where people talked about slowing it down, some of that we did ask for it to be in comparison to Blackboard assignments, but the comments did say quite a lot about would rather mark on paper. So I think there was some amount of people saying that they would rather go back to paper-based marking, and that's what they were comparing it to. But also 20% the same. So we've got 70% who are saying it's the same or it sped things up, with the admin staff saying that they liked it a lot more, and the student feedback being pretty positive too. So for a first run through, I was really happy with that, because we don't expect anything to be perfect. Absolutely nothing will suit everybody. And we are going to be talking about sort of going into next year, what things are kept, what things change around, and trying to give a chance for things which work for different people, so that we acknowledge that one size doesn't ever really fit all. Okay, so in the staff feedback, the kind of written bits and the anecdotal bits. So Dimitrios helps quite a lot with this, talking about kind of what he'd heard around the department. We also got things from sessions that we've run. It didn't line up with all our procedures and systems. So there were various frustrations about things like they use email address as the unique identifier, whereas we'd like to use student number. We wanted to be able to have groups, but that wasn't something we could have straight away. It just didn't always quite do exactly what we expected it to. But what I would say about that, particularly with the groups bit, I've put an asterisk on that one. Crowdmark were brilliant at helping with that. So where we had some issues, where some things didn't work, they gave us a lot of support in terms of finding either workarounds or in some cases developing entirely new things for us, which is something that we don't get from all of our suppliers. So really appreciated that from them. The annotations can be a bit clunky. My handwriting is terrible at the best of times, so I didn't actually do any writing today, but because it's online, it's never going to be quite as smooth as it would be if you're using sort of a PDF app on your computer or on your phone or tablet. It's never going to be quite as smooth. It is always going to be, well, actually the problem is sometimes it is more smooth, that it's been made into curves where you maybe wanted it to be a little bit more kind of angled. You can't resize the scripts, so we can't zoom in at the minute, but you can generally get around that quite well using your browser to be able to zoom in. And you can't mark homework as it comes in, so you have to wait until you've got all of them in. Although I did work with Dimitrios on this and we found a way around that, that you can make it a timed assessment that means you can start marking earlier, which is useful. But what worked? Quite a lot of things. Marking by question is much quicker and more intuitive than having to mark an entire paper all in one go. But you could move up and down. So if you wanted to see what they'd put for question 1, you could actually go find that quite easily by just scrolling up. So it's nice to mark by question because it also means that where we had GTAs on some of the courses, there's a big engineering course and they use GTAs really well to mark by question. The reusable comments is great for saving time, dragging and dropping things on. The tags have helped a lot in terms of the admin staff being able to go in and find things. We're looking at different ways of using those tags as well for the checking process at the minute, which they're quite useful for just being able to do that filtering and finding quickly. The automatic totals means that there's slightly less of the worrying about whether you've added it all up correctly, although still do say that you need to check that because the automatic totals will be going from the bits on the comments, so needs a little bit of checking. Yeah, and being able to grade the files, waiting for instructions to the end, so there's no manual entering. You're not having to go in and just enter everything individually. So I said I'd try and be a little bit quicker, but next steps is what I always put on my slides when I'm delivering training. It's maybe a little bit different today, but you've got a chance to ask questions. I've not looked in the chat and I'm going to go through that now. But there's also, we have some videos. So there's 2 videos on our website, one from a kind of student side, which talks through how students submit, one from a staff side. And they're quite useful for being able to kind of see how it works from kind of both sides if you want to go back to look at anything quickly. If you want to get in touch later, I've only put my email address on there because it was easier to just put the one, but I can pass any questions on to Dimitrios as well. He's happy to answer them. Or I'm on Twitter, you can ask questions on there. And you can get in touch with Crowdmark. They're absolutely lovely, really very helpful. So they get back to you pretty quickly so that you can ask them anything if you want demos. Let me go and have a little bit of a look in the chat. I think it looks like Dimitrios has been doing a great job of fielding questions. He'll come in and answer some now as well if there's anything.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Jenny. I think tell my round of applause there. I think just to take a quick question for me before we move on to the next one, which has come in from Ben, which is an interesting question because I think there's sort of grades, so there's Crowdmark and Gradescope, and Ben was just wondering, have you done any comparison of the two?
Okay, so yes, we did look at both. And I spent quite a bit of time playing around with both. I had a lot of fun with that, actually. It was great. This is one of the good bits of my job where I make silly questions and play around with them. In the end, we went with Crowdmark because of practicalities. What I would say is I'm incredibly pleased with our choice. It has worked out really well. They've been very responsive to us in terms of working with us on differences between Canadian and UK needs, which has been quite a big thing. It's not something we always get from suppliers. So the fact that they've been so good on that has been massively helpful. It's meant that we've been able to where there's an issue, fix it fairly quickly usually, which has been nice. We haven't got, well, we have got some information about the comparison. I don't know whether I'd be able to share that, but I'm definitely happy to have conversations with anybody if you're at an institution that's looking at it. I think somebody asked about pricing, and that's one that we're definitely not allowed to tell people about, because same with most of the tools that we have, we can't say how much different institutions pay for them. But if you get in touch with them, then they'll talk to you about what your requirements are with that.
Brilliant, thanks, Jenny. I think we probably need to move on to, if that's okay, on to Charles now. But thank you both to you and Dimitrios. If you wouldn't mind kind of answering the remaining questions in the chat, that would be brilliant. But yeah, thank you for a fascinating overview of your use of Crowdmark there. Brilliant.